Warning: this podcast discusses paranormal activity and other topics some might find disturbing. Listener discretion is advised. Hey guys, I'm Ashley and this is Ghost Gossip. On today's episode, we are diving into something I never heard of until I started looking into paranormal activity, and that is astral projection. But before we get started, I just want to say I have a special guest today, and it is my husband.
What's up, y'all?
This is Daniel. If you have been around since the Willing and Well days, you know that he used to be my co-host, and then I fired him.
He got fired.
He got fired.
Got the boot.
Well, this was something that I couldn't just talk about by myself, so I asked him if he would come down here and let me read him these stories. And so he so graciously agreed to come down here.
That's when the lighting was important, so you could see my reaction.
Oh, okay. I can see you just fine.
Oh.
Okay, so have you ever heard of astral projection?
I have.
Yeah? What do you think it is? Before we talked about it yesterday.
Yeah, so before we talked about it yesterday, in my mind, I think of it as a perception of a different plane or a different dimension, something along those lines that you are encountering in your mind or in your mental perception.
Okay, so I never heard of it before. According to Wikipedia, astral projection is used to describe an intentional out-of-body experience that assumes the existence of the subtle body called astral body or body of lights, through which consciousness can function separately from the physical body and travel throughout the astral plane, which is what you were mentioning.
Right.
So it is not so much of a plane of itself, but it's actually an out-of-body experience on its own.
Or both.
Or both.
I would say both. It's partly that, but it's going to this other plane or this other dimension that you are projecting.
Yes, I assume so. But, when I first heard about it, I was like, what? Were you similar?
I don't think I was necessarily similar. I think that from the time I first heard about it, I think that it was in my younger years, in my experimental years. We'll leave it at that.
Oh, gosh.
And so it made sense in those terms.
Okay. Well, you know that I did not experiment in my younger years at all. And I am still experiment free as I've gotten older. And I am still learning, but I never heard about it until I started listening to paranormal podcasts such as Two Girls, One Ghost. And they talk about it a lot. And that's when I started learning about it. Now, I'm trying to be more open-minded about things that seem impossible. Because, I'm the person, and you know this, I'm the person that thinks we have some sort of spirit or energy in our house. So, of course, of all people, I'm trying to be open-minded to a variety of different paranormal experiences.
Sure. And I would say, too, I think from just our two perspectives, you see it within a spiritual framework.
Right.
Whereas I see it more of like in a mental type framework. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Would you agree with that?
I do agree. For those of you who don't know, Daniel and I have two very different points of view about paranormal activity. And I am very spiritual and I can sense energies. I can feel when energy shifts. And I do believe in spirits. And I'm not saying he doesn't, but we believe they exist in a little bit of a different
mechanism.
Right.
Yeah, we're looking at the same thing, but we're looking at we have our own filters or our own glasses we're looking at it through.
Right. And it gets very frustrating for me sometimes because he will admit that whatever energy that I do feel in the house affects me differently than it does him.
Yeah.
He doesn't sense things. Now, he has experienced some of the things that I've experienced because he's been right there beside me, like Alexa turning the light on at 2 a.m.
No comment. That was freaky.
That was very, because she was like, okay.
Yeah, that was freaky.
Yeah, and then the lights coming on, which we have discussed round and round.
But it's Alexa. She may have her own consciousness by now. So.
We've talked about that as well. But just trying to, I know I can be a little bit skeptical when it comes to things such as astral projection, just because I don't know about it. But I am trying to really just kind of keep an open mind and remember that unexplainable things have been happening to the human species for as long as our existence has been. Mm-hmm. And maybe astral projection is one of them.
Yeah, I definitely think that kind of to that point, we have innate senses and that we're not necessarily, don't necessarily interact with our physical world that we see and we touch and we smell.
Right.
But at times, those senses are turned on or they connect with different environments. Mm-hmm. And so I think just like, to use an example, just like how your dog knows that you're coming home. And they've done studies where the dog owner comes home at different times, just random times, and the dog always knows. Always knows.
Our dogs always know when we're home.
So I think we have senses like that sometimes, they're very dulled in a lot of people. They're heightened in some other people. And in different situations, circumstances, energies, however, spiritual places or events, those type senses get turned on.
Right. And what's odd is we've never talked about astral projection before, but the past 2 weeks, we both separately have heard you through your podcast you've been listening to, and both of us at a relative's house, them talking about it. And then I get this email from a listener who has so graciously sent many stories, and her name is Nicole, and she has allowed me to use her name and her stories.
Thank you, Nicole.
Thanks, Nicole. About astral projection. I don't believe in coincidences. You know that. I don't find that it's a coincidence that you and I were talking about it. You heard it on a podcast. I started talking about it. We talked about it with some relatives. And then I opened my email the next day and have just countless stories from somebody who heard about my podcast from another podcast, of all places, and submitted her stories to be read.
Yeah, I think that, think of it as, links in a chain. Mm-hmm. And you can put other links inside that chain and make new connections, just like social networks or however you want to look at it. But definitely things like that seem to have a link.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it's uncanny.
Yeah. And it's funny because we've talked about it before. I don't believe in coincidences unless I'm in Europe and I just happen to run into somebody that I know in Europe. I don't think that person has followed me there. That's a true coincidence. But other things such as this, I don't.
Yeah, our friends in Vegas, that was a coincidence.
Yes, I ran into one of my dear friends in Vegas when we got married, of all places, and I haven't seen her since high school. And she was one of my closest friends in high school, and then there she was. And it was insane, but that was a true coincidence. But sometimes I feel like everything happening in regards to astral projection the past 2 weeks, it was like, okay, this needs to be an episode.
I think it goes back to, you're manifesting and you begin to surround yourself and put yourself in an opportunity for those connections to be made.
Right.
So I think that's
me begging for stories on Instagram.
Yeah.
Please, somebody send me a story because it's really slow. And I do want to discuss. I actually talked to my sister, and she's going to come on, and she's going to share some of her stories. And so that way both of us can share, because my sister and I both are very spiritual, and she's very intuitive as well. And she's an empath, and she senses energies. Maybe a little more than I do.
You should call that podcast the A-Dub Squared podcast.
But neither one of us are A-Dubs anymore.
I know, but
but it will still be a ghost gossip episode. But anyway, so
let's get to Nicole's story.
I'm going to get you. Thank you, Daniel.
You're welcome.
So
I'm here to help.
Okay, so her happenings started, and I call them happenings because it happened.
What's happening?
2001 to 2003. Now, this isn't so much an astral projection story. This has to do with sleep paralysis. But did you know that this is according to Nicole, that sleep paralysis is the first step of astral projection?
I didn't No, I didn't. I didn't know that was directly correlated.
I didn't either. So that's why I included this as the first, because this was her first encounter. This was her first experience listed in her email. And these happened between 2001 to 2003. In my college years, I experienced my first sleep paralysis experience. I was laying on my black futon bed and woke up but couldn't move or speak. I felt a presence in the room but couldn't see anything. I also felt a heavy vibration on my chest. The only thing that could move was my eyeballs. I was paralyzed. When I finally snapped out of it, I called my mom the next morning to tell her what happened. I'm not sure if she believed me or not. It happened sporadically ever since, maybe twice a year. What I didn't know at the time was that sleep paralysis is the first step to astral projection. And the reason I included this is because I didn't know that, and I just had sleep paralysis last week. Was it last week? Last Monday?
Was it last Monday or the week before?
It was
I can't remember.
March 6th. It was the night of the...
it was last Monday.
Yeah. So I just... Again, it was one of those emails I got. I just had experienced my own sleep paralysis. And that was about the most terrifying thing that I've ever experienced. And so it just... I didn't realize that they were related.
Yeah, I had no idea.
I didn't either. We're still learning.
Yeah, and my mind is thinking like, is there, because like we started off talking, like I have a different perspective, so my wheels are turning and wondering if there are different routes to get to astral projection, or just thinking about my own experience.
Okay. In 2006, she says, Eddie, my husband, and I were living in an apartment. We were sleeping in bed, and I woke up in the middle of the night, early morning, to see Eddie standing over his own body, looking down at it. He had his cap on and a button-up shirt like he always likes to wear. He didn't look up at all and seemed out of it. I noticed a black shadow person next to him, and I couldn't make out the features, just the shape. I was just staring at them in disbelief when I felt the shadow notice me looking at them. I could hear it think, "She can see us?" And they both slowly faded away into the air. Eddie never looked up. Something inside of me told me that it was Nick, Eddie's deceased brother, who was standing with him. I never had any fear until the next day when I feared that was a death omen for Eddie. Years later, I realized what I saw was Eddie's astral projection outside of his own body.
How did she know that he was astral projecting that?
Because her husband was laying right next to her. And then she saw him standing over. So when you astral project, allegedly, you come out of your body, but your soul comes out of your body, but your body stays.
Yeah, I'm thinking of it in completely different terms.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm thinking about it in terms of you yourself are experiencing yourself being on a different plane, a different dimension.
Right.
Not necessarily an out-of-body experience looking back on yourself.
Well, I think what out-of-body experiences, they can go, what you're saying, into different planes, but I think they can go into planes on our plane. They can go other places. What I read, you can teach yourself how to do it if you focus on a place. And it's almost like meditation. And you can, I'm not sure if other people can see you, but you know what I mean. It is, you can put yourself in another location.
Like, I know that without a fact, like I have been mentally in a different realm or plane, my physical body being still in our current physical world and interacting with it, but being in a whole different realm.
Right. Well, some of the podcasts I listen to, they talk a lot about astral projection, about seeing people that they're not there, but you see them. And it's kind of like we talked with my relative the other day. 2 people have seen her, but it wasn't her. And they're like, is that a spirit? Is that a ghost? Or is that actually her astral projection because she was in bed? And it could, we don't know. It could, I don't believe in coincidences, like I said, but it could be.
Well, like some of the stuff that I've been reading and looking at and kind of delving into is they've done studies and people are in altered states of consciousness and have different backgrounds, different life stories, different ages, nothing seemingly the same about these people, right? And they are in this altered states of consciousness, and they all come back with similar experiences, describing the same types of forms of entities,
Beings,
right?
yeah.
Right. So that's why I kind of look at like an astral projection as not necessarily being
on this plane.
so well defined as being.
Right.
Does that make sense?
I totally understand what you're saying, but I think that it can, if it's possible, it can go both ways.
Yeah.
I think what you're explaining is people are leaving this plane and entering into another, and they're experiencing a whole different plane, which others have said that spirits do exist on a separate plane, which if you think about it, I don't feel the energy in this house all the time.
Right.
It comes and goes. It is when, I guess, the planes cross or the veil is lowered or, I think that with our spirit, Wayne, he loves Christmas and he was around a lot around Christmas. And that might be why I felt him so much around that time. And the only reason I know he loved Christmas is because the man left Christmas lights. They still are up on this house.
They're embedded in the house.
We can't get them down because we have a 3-story house and we can't reach them.
I don't know how he got up there.
He had to pay somebody.
But
or he floated.
To your point, like I don't think, and on the same token, I don't think that it's strictly limited to being completely mentally in a different place, because I've never experienced that level.
Right.
I've experienced like physically react or physically being in this world, but
somewhere else,
mentally somewhere else.
Oh yeah.
And still being able to interact, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so same thing with what Nicole's describing, like she's mentally in this world and physically outside of her body.
Well, listen to this one. This one happened in 2017, and I want to read this one because I had a similar experience and I just thought it was a dream. And you'll probably remember me asking you about it. She says, we just moved out of our second house and into a third house. I was so focused on fixing that one up and making it ready to sell that's all I could think about for the longest time. Once we were finally settled and were moved in, I had about 3 dreams that were so real and all happened within a week or 2 of each other. Everything seemed more real than actual reality. I was back in our last house walking around. The house looked different on the inside and was somewhat empty. Each time I panicked thinking, why am I here? The cops are going to get called on me. One time I was on the outside walking around the side of the house and I could feel the breeze on my face and in my hair. The final dream I had, I was walking through the front door towards the garage, and as I approached, the door opened and a woman with dark, medium long length hair walked in with a man behind her. Their facial features were difficult to make out, but she immediately noticed me and stopped dead in her tracks, staring at me. I panicked and immediately woke up. It wasn't until much later that I realized that I had astral projected to my old house. It happened without my control, but I learned that one of the methods to do so is to think about a place with total concentration and you will end up there. I unintentionally did that while focusing on fixing up our last house. Basically, I was the ghost that she saw. I wish I had the courage to go back to that house and ask the owners if they actually saw me, but I think they think I was crazy.
Yeah, I think that, I've experienced things dreaming that are...
Like lucid dreaming.
Yeah, like super lucid dreaming, like wake up and think that I'm somewhere else.
Well, and that's, if you remember when I sold my house, I can't remember if we were in this house, but I woke up. I had a dream that I was in my last house and it was so real. And I woke up and asked you, did I sell my house? Because I had that panic because it felt so real that I still had my house.
Yeah, I think that was at Oak Street.
And because I think it was a few months after we actually sold it, I believed. But in my dream, everything was the same. It was so real that when I woke up, I had to ask you if I actually sold my house. And I'm wondering, I'm not saying I astral projected. I'd never even thought about that, but it was a very lucid dream.
Yeah.
Now, what gets me, I'm skipping around here. Her children apparently can do it too, which is crazy. She's got like this family of astral projectors, which is, for me, if I walked in and saw an astral projection of Daisy or one of our other children, I think I would pee my pants.
Yes, I've never experienced anything quite like that. So that's wild.
Yeah. And, just trying to, and I know we're both skeptical when it comes to things like this, but just thinking outside of the box.
Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah. So Chelsea is one of her daughters, approached me and told me about a dream that she had where her sister dropped one of her light toys from the top bunk bed. Her sister came down to get it, and I came into the room to wake them up, according to Chelsea. At the same time, she said it was so real, but when she turned around, she saw herself laying in bed, and then her sister and I were gone. The next thing she remembered was me coming into the room for real to wake them up. Chelsea appeared very sincere and confused as to why she saw herself laying in bed. I don't get into details about astral projection with her, so her description makes me believe that she just had her first experience.
Could be. It's like we were talking about last night. Like we have
the children in the lanterns versus adults with the flashlights.
Yeah, so we get so like super focused on the day to day, and we transition from having this lantern like perspective to having more of a spotlight, flashlight type perspective, and that lantern perception, like a childlike, is like, oh, there's a worm on the ground, and you investigate and you explore. You see a ladybug, and so everything's brand new, and so you have this wide field of vision, right?
Wild and wide,
and so that you're perceptive, and you're just taking all this stuff in, and as we get older, that field of vision narrows.
Right. We become focused.
And for obvious reasons, right? But I think that as we get older, it's good from time to time to open that field of view up. And I think that can mean all sorts of different things for different.
Mm-hmm. Well, and she had one last story, and this was both of these were in 2022. She says, I woke up around 5 a.m. laying on my left side, on Eddie's side of the bed, and saw my eldest daughter sitting half on the bed staring at me. I reached out twice to touch her leg, but nothing was there except for an image. This may be another experience where I saw someone astral project. She was smiling slightly, but was translucent, and then disappeared into the air. So it seems like she just has a whole family of projectors.
Yeah, just everybody's moving around.
Just everybody. They must have amazing concentration.
They're just crazy, like natural
abilities.
Deep, like when they sleep, like they just, because like you're talking about, like you can get to that place through meditation.
Right? Or music.
Yeah, so if you are naturally more akin, and your brain is more akin to getting to that place, right, it would make sense that your children, you would pass that along to your children as well. Yeah,
it's fascinating to me. And like, we've never experienced anything like this, but experiencing other things that are unexplainable, why couldn't it be possible?
Yeah, I think there's any number of various possibilities that we in our everyday lives aren't necessarily attuned to recognize.
Right. And I tried to research this more. I tried to investigate a little bit deeper into it, but I'm sure you are not surprised to know there's not a lot of scientific studies out there, because the human consciousness is not easy to study.
No.
And most people who have a westernized way of thinking, they say, well, what does the evidence say? Show me the evidence. And we both know with paranormal activity or anything like astral projection, the evidence is usually very personal. It doesn't happen to everybody, because like us in our house, the things that I experience, you don't experience, except if Alexa's turning our lights on in the middle of the night or the sunroom lights going off and on.
And I think one of the tough things is how do you experiment that? How do you test that? I mean, that's a real challenge, right?
You can't.
right? So like the stuff I've been reading about psychedelics, that's something that can be tested, right? Controlled, it can be measured.
But still, once
But
they're
like,
unconscious or once they're sleeping or once they're in that state, you can't really study it because they're experiencing it.
right, but they do like, you know, interviews and you know, they video and so I mean there is some sort of observation and measurement technique involved, right?
Right.
But with like this kind of stuff, like how do you measure that? Like
You can't.
You can't, right?
It's happening most of the time when they're sleeping.
Right. So yeah, I mean, there's no mechanism to test it, right? So
Right.
I think that's I think it limits our understanding as a whole.
Right. But, you know, as the more I listen to other people's stories, she's not the only one.
No.
It is. I was actually just listening. Two Girls, One Ghost is one of the podcasts I started listening to once I really started experiencing things in the house. And they actually just had Patrick Hines from True Crime Obsessed on their network. And he has experienced astral projection and out-of-body experiences. Yeah. And it's just crazy because you talk to people or you listen to people and they never really talk about it. And then they talk about it and you're like, oh my God, they've experienced something too. Because, you know, we talked about this last night. People that know me, they wouldn't think that I've had the experiences that I've had because I don't look like the type that just walk around and say, I believe in ghosts.
Well, yeah, I mean, and I think another huge body of evidence that is sometimes easily overlooked. Look back at pretty much every culture of people, whether it be small tribes of indigenous people or whether it be large civilizations all over the country throughout history, have had some sort of experiences like these or very, very similar. So how is that like? How do you explain that? You know what I mean? Like
that's why it's unexplainable.
It's a huge body of evidence, of anecdotal evidence, right?
Right.
Circumstantial evidence for you true crime junkies.
I love circumstantial.
So yeah, like I said, there may not be any measurable or observable ways to look at this, right? So there's no forensics, right? But you look through every.
There's no dinner.
There's no dinner. So you look through every society, every civilization throughout history. They have some form of this.
Oh yeah,
without a doubt.
Even the civilizations that didn't write and they communicated through pictures. There's evidence that they experienced things such as this. So it goes back for as long as our species has existed. It's just crazy. If you would have asked me 2 years ago about it, I'd been like, I don't know. Kind of like UFOs. I don't know. But as I've gotten older, my mind has gotten more open. And it's like, well, maybe. It's very intriguing to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the keys for me, I know, and I think for probably many other people, is ask yourself the question, what if?
What if?
Or maybe. And when you ask what if or maybe, you open yourself up to all sorts of different possibilities. And, you know, it may quite honestly, it may challenge your held beliefs that you've held for a long time.
Might make you get out of your little box.
But at the same time, like, be willing to ask that because it's going to either do one of two things. It's going to strengthen your own beliefs that you already have, right?
Right.
If you take the time to do some research and ask that question, what if, right? And then the second thing it's going to do is can open you up to all kinds of different possibilities that you're willing to work towards finding the answer to, or get more information on, right?
Right.
And so in doing so, you're adding links to that chain, and I think that's always a net positive,
right? I think learning is always positive. I mean, except watching Doogie Howser with her 11-year-old and realizing that was way more sexual than I remember.
It was definitely a different time.
It was a different time back then.
Teach me how to doogie.
So I want to know what you think. What do you think about astral projection?
The jury's out.
The jury's out.
The jury's out.
Well, and listeners, I want to know what you think. If you have had experiences, we'll send them in. Nicole has sent me so many more, but because I wanted to do an astral projection episode, I narrowed these down to just a few of her stories. I will be sharing more of hers. So thank you again, Nicole. I really appreciate it. That was this week's episode. Thank you for listening, and they'll see you later.
Bye.
Hey guys, it's me. Before you go, if you are liking what you're hearing, please leave a review, 5 stars, and follow the show. That really helps the podcast get seen. I appreciate y'all so much. They'll see you next time.